The grand chamber of the Galactic Council fell silent as the human delegation entered. Tall ceilings arched overhead, with light filtering through crystalline windows that displayed the endless stars beyond. Representatives from over 30 alien species turned their varied appendages, eye stalks, and sensory organs toward the newcomers. Ambassador James Walker led the small group of humans, his back straight and face composed despite the obvious tension. This was humanity's first official meeting with the Council after the initial contact 3 months ago. His military attaché, Lieutenant Emma Reed, walked half a step behind him, her hand occasionally brushing the ceremonial sidearm at her hip, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed. Admiral Krell, the blue-skinned, four-armed representative of the Council's military committee, watched the humans with barely concealed amusement. His large eyes blinked slowly as he leaned over to whisper something to the reptilian diplomat beside him. Both suppressed what could only be described as laughter. "Welcome, Terrans," announced the Council speaker, a tall, willowy being with metallic skin that shimmered under the chamber lights. "The Galactic Council recognizes Earth and extends greetings to your kind." Walker bowed slightly. "On behalf of all humanity, we thank you for this historic opportunity." The formalities continued for several minutes until Admiral Krell interrupted, rising from his seat. "Speaker, if I may address our guests." He didn't wait for permission before continuing. "I've reviewed the reports on human technology. While their space travel capabilities are adequate, I must express concerns about their weapon systems." His upper arms gesticulated while his lower ones remained folded across his chest. "They still use projectile weapons, chemical propellants, metal bullets." A wave of murmurs swept through the chamber. "Yes, the monkeys with metal throwers," Krell added, not bothering to use the translation device's whisper function. Several council members chuckled. Walker's jaw tightened, but he maintained his diplomatic composure. Lieutenant Reed, however, narrowed her eyes at the Admiral. The speaker raised a hand for silence. "Admiral Krell, we must show respect to new species, regardless of their technological development." "Of course, Speaker," Krell said, bowing slightly. "I simply wish to address security protocols. If the humans are to maintain a presence on this station, we must account for their primitive armaments." Walker stepped forward. "With respect, Admiral, humans have used projectile weapons for centuries because they work effectively. Against other humans, perhaps," Krell replied dismissively. "But you'll find the galaxy operates on different principles. Our vessels employ energy shields. Our troops wear armor that would laugh at your bullets." Reed couldn't contain herself any longer. "Would you care to test that theory, Admiral?" The chamber fell silent again, this time with tension. Walker placed a gentle hand on Reed's arm. "What my attaché means is that we would welcome the opportunity to demonstrate our capabilities, should the Council desire." Krell's four arms spread wide in a gesture of magnanimity. "Perhaps a museum demonstration could be arranged. I'm sure many of our cultural historians would find your artifacts fascinating." More laughter rippled through the chamber. The speaker intervened again. "The Council has decided to extend protected species status to humans. While not full members, you will be permitted a small delegation here and limited access to non-restricted areas." Walker nodded, understanding the real message. Humans were being treated as primitives, barely worth serious consideration. "We accept the Council's generous offer," he said carefully, "and we look forward to proving our worth as potential allies." As the humans were escorted from the chamber, Admiral Krell approached Walker. "No offense intended, Ambassador," he said, not sounding remotely apologetic. "Every species must find its place in the galactic order. Yours simply happens to be several rungs down the ladder." Walker smiled thinly. "History is full of underestimated species, Admiral. I suggest you read some of ours sometime." Krell's laughter followed them out of the chamber, but Reed noticed that Walker wasn't bothered. In fact, he was smiling. "Sir?" she questioned quietly. "Let them laugh, Lieutenant," Walker murmured. It's always an advantage when they don't see you coming. The Council's weapons testing facility gleamed with polished metal and humming energy fields. Lieutenant Emma Reed stood at rigid attention as a group of alien weapons experts examined the collection of human firearms laid out on the table before them. Her face remained neutral, but her eyes missed nothing. "This is truly all of them?" asked Tarn, the Council's chief weapons specialist. The tall, thin alien had skin like burnished copper and 6 delicate fingers on each hand. He picked up a standard-issue military handgun with obvious distaste. "These are representative samples," Reed answered, "from basic pistols to our more advanced rifle systems." A hulking Vorax warrior named Grux snorted, the sound emerging from his breathing slits like steam from a kettle. "These are not weapons. These are toys." Standing nearly 8 feet tall with armored skin and jutting tusks, the Vorax were known as the Council's premier warriors. "Chemical propellants," Tarn muttered, scanning the pistol with a handheld device. "Primitive gunpowder derivatives, metal projectiles." He set the gun down and wiped his fingers on a cloth as if touching something dirty. "We abandoned such technology thousands of years ago." Reed took a slow, deep breath. "With respect, we find them quite effective." This prompted laughter from the assembled aliens. A holographic display activated, showing energy weapons of various designs floating in the air. "These," Tarn said proudly, "are modern weapons. Clean energy discharge, adjustable output, no need for physical ammunition." He gestured at one particularly sleek rifle. "This can fire continuously for days without reloading." "Can your guns do that, Lieutenant?" "No," Reed admitted, "but they have other advantages." "Such as?" Grux challenged, moving closer to loom over her. "I'd prefer to demonstrate rather than explain," Reed replied, not backing away despite the Vorax's intimidating presence. "That won't be necessary," Tarn said dismissively. "Our scans tell us everything we need to know. The kinetic force these weapons generate is insufficient against modern armor and completely useless against energy shields." Reed picked up one of the rifles from the table. "Theory and practice often differ." The room fell silent at her boldness. "Put that down," Grux growled. "Primitives should not handle weapons in our presence." From the back of the room, a voice spoke up. Perhaps a demonstration would be educational. All heads turned to see Drell, a blue-skinned scientist from one of the Council's older species. Unlike the others, Drell's expression showed genuine curiosity rather than contempt. "These humans have traveled far to join us," Drell continued. "Scientific inquiry demands we examine all technologies with open minds." Tarn looked ready to object, but Drell's seniority in the Council hierarchy was evident from the respectful distance the others kept from him. "Fine," Tarn conceded reluctantly. "A limited demonstration can be arranged. Tomorrow, at the remote testing range." Reed carefully replaced the rifle on the table. "Thank you. I believe it will be informative." As the aliens filed out of the room, Drell lingered behind. "They underestimate you," the blue alien said quietly. Reed raised an eyebrow. "You don't." "I've studied Earth's history," Drell replied. "Your species advanced from primitive flight to space travel in less than a century. That suggests remarkable adaptability. Yet they mock our weapons," Reed noted. Drell's mouth formed what might have been a smile. "The Council races have grown complacent. They believe technological advancement follows a single predictable path. Energy weapons replaced projectiles for us, so they assume that's the only logical progression. And you think differently." "I think," Drell said carefully, "that a species that survived its own violent history might have developed weapons optimization in ways we never considered." Reed allowed herself a small smile. "Tomorrow should be interesting then." "Indeed." Drell moved toward the door, but paused. "One piece of advice, Lieutenant. Tarn will try to control the demonstration, to show your weapons in the worst possible light." "I expected as much." "Be prepared to improvise," Drell said. "And perhaps bring something they haven't seen yet." As the alien scientist departed, Reed looked down at the collection of primitive weapons. Ambassador Walker had anticipated this reaction and had planned accordingly. In her quarters was a sealed case containing items not on this table, items that would wipe the smug expressions off the council experts' faces. Tomorrow would indeed be interesting. The testing range sprawled across a barren moon, far from the council's central station. A small gathering of alien officials stood behind transparent shields, their expressions ranging from bored to amused. Admiral Krell had joined them, his 4 arms crossed in various configurations of impatience. Lieutenant Reed and her team of 3 human soldiers unpacked their equipment methodically. They had brought more cases than yesterday, including several that Tarn hadn't scanned. "Let's proceed with this museum exhibition," Tarn announced, checking a datapad. "We've set up standard testing targets at various distances." Reed nodded, noting the condescension in his voice. "We'll start with basic demonstrations and progress to more specialized applications." The first human, Corporal Miller, stepped up to the firing line with a standard handgun. When he fired, the sharp crack echoed across the range. Several aliens winced at the noise. The bullet struck the center of the target, but the assembled council members looked unimpressed. Primitive chemical reaction, metal projectile, excessive noise, minimal impact, Tarn narrated into a recording device. Highly inefficient. Reed ignored him as Sergeant Peters demonstrated a military rifle, hitting targets at increasingly distant ranges. The shots were precise, but the council observers remained unmoved. "Is this what you brought us to see?" Admiral Krell called out. "We viewed historical archives with similar displays." "We're just getting started, Admiral," Reed replied calmly. She nodded to the 3rd soldier, who brought forward a larger case. From it, Reed removed what appeared to be a bulkier rifle with specialized ammunition. "This is where things get interesting. We've set up a target wearing standard council military armor at 200 meters. Tarn laughed. "That armor will easily withstand your projectiles. It's designed to disperse energy weapon impacts." "Different principles at work," Reed said, taking aim. When she fired, the sound was sharper, the recoil more substantial. Through the view screen, they watched as the round punched cleanly through the armored target. The aliens' laughter stopped. "Impossible," Grux growled. "Our armor is designed to dissipate energy," Reed interrupted. "But this tungsten carbide penetrator doesn't care about energy dispersal. It's about focused kinetic force." Before they could respond, Reed signaled her team. They quickly set up the next demonstration, a shield generator protecting another target. "Energy shields stop all known weapons in the council arsenal," Tarn stated, though with less certainty than before. Reed loaded a different round into her rifle. "Energy shields are designed to stop energy. But what about matter?" When she fired, the specialized round passed through the shield as if it weren't there, destroying the target behind it. Admiral Krell stepped forward, his upper eyes widened in alarm. "How is this possible?" "Shield-penetrating rounds," Reed explained. "The shield is tuned to stop high-energy particles, but our round is encased in a material that appears inert until impact." The final demonstration involved a larger weapon that Private Jackson wheeled forward on a platform. "This," Reed said, "is a portable railgun. No chemical propellants, just electromagnetic acceleration. When fired, the weapon made a distinctive whine-crack sound. The projectile moved so fast that the aliens didn't see it. They only witnessed the reinforced bunker target at the far end of the range explode in a shower of debris." Silence fell across the testing range. "Your energy weapons are impressive," Reed said into the quiet. "Clean, efficient, elegant. But there's something you've overlooked about kinetic weapons." "And what is that?" Drell asked, genuine interest in his voice. "They don't care about technology level. A bullet doesn't need to be smarter than the armor it hits. It just needs enough force behind it." Reed placed her rifle back in its case. "No defense is perfect. Variety in approach ensures survival." Admiral Krell stared at the destroyed bunker, his four arms no longer crossed but hanging loosely at his sides. These weapons, they're not in the reports. No, Reed agreed. They wouldn't be. As they packed up their equipment, Reed noticed the changed expressions on the aliens' faces. The mockery was gone, replaced by something new. Respect tinged with concern. Drell approached her as the others huddled in urgent conversation. "You've given them much to think about, Lieutenant." "That was the point," Reed replied with a small smile. "Sometimes the oldest solutions still work best." Emergency alarms blared throughout the council station, their pulsing red lights reflecting off the polished surfaces of the grand meeting chamber. Representatives from dozens of species rushed to their assigned seats as holographic displays flickered to life above the central platform. Ambassador Walker and Lieutenant Reed, who had been meeting with Drell about cultural exchange programs, found themselves caught in the sudden commotion. They were nearly pushed out of the chamber by security until Drell intervened. "They are with me," the blue-skinned scientist insisted. "The human delegation has a right to observe." The guards reluctantly allowed them to remain in a back corner as Admiral Krell strode to the center platform. His normally composed face showed clear signs of stress, his upper arms gesturing frantically while his lower ones operated control panels. "The reports are confirmed," Krell announced, his voice cutting through the chamber's chaos. 3 outer council worlds have been attacked by an unknown species calling themselves the Kryvax. The holographic display shifted to show grainy footage of sleek, angular ships with red markings. The images changed to display the aftermath of attacks. Burning cities, destroyed defense installations, and council ships drifting dead in space. The Kryvax gave no warning and rejected all communication attempts. Krell continued. "Their technology appears to be on par with our own, but with concerning differences." A new set of images appeared, showing council troops firing energy weapons at armored Kryvax soldiers. The energy blasts seemed to wash over the invaders with minimal effect. "Our standard weapons have proven largely ineffective," Krell admitted, causing a wave of shocked murmurs to sweep through the chamber. Walker leaned closer to Reed. "Their armor seems to absorb or deflect energy somehow," he whispered. Reed nodded, her mind racing with tactical possibilities. The speaker rose from his seat, his metallic skin dulled with concern. "What are our defensive options, Admiral?" "We've dispatched the Third Fleet to contain the incursion," Krell replied. "But early engagements have been troubling. The Kryvax use some form of shielding that disperses our energy weapons. We're adjusting frequencies, but it's a temporary solution at best." Reed glanced at Walker, who nodded slightly. She stepped forward, causing several nearby aliens to turn in surprise. "Admiral," she called out, "has anyone tried physical projectile weapons against the Kryvax?" The chamber fell silent as all eyes turned to the human officer. Krell's expression tightened. "Lieutenant Reed, this is hardly the time for your primitive weapons advocacy." "With respect, Admiral," Walker interjected, moving to stand beside Reed. "You've seen what our primitive weapons can do. If the Kryvax have developed defenses specifically against energy weapons, perhaps a different approach is worth considering." The speaker raised a hand for silence as arguments broke out across the chamber. "Ambassador Walker, are you offering human assistance?" "We are," Walker replied firmly. "Earth stands ready to help defend the Council against this threat." Grux, the Vorax warrior, rose to his impressive height. "We do not need help from primitives. The Vorax battle fleets will crush these Kryvax vermin." "The Vorax battle fleet has already engaged the enemy at Sector 7, Krell said quietly. "They were defeated in under an hour." This revelation stunned the chamber into silence. Tarn, the weapons specialist, spoke up from his position near Krell. "The human proposal has some merit. Their weapons operate on principles the Kryvax may not have encountered or developed defenses against." "A desperate suggestion," another council member objected. Walker stepped forward. "What do you have to lose by trying? At minimum, allow us to equip some of your forces with our weapons technology. If it fails, you've lost nothing." The council erupted into heated debate. Reed watched as factions quickly formed, some dismissing the human offer outright, others cautiously considering it. Finally, the speaker called for order. "We will take this matter to a vote. But first, Ambassador Walker, what do you ask in return for this assistance?" "Protection," Walker replied without hesitation. "If these Kryvacs defeat the Council, Earth would stand alone. We want your guarantee that Council forces will help defend our world if necessary." Admiral Krell studied the humans with new eyes. Gone was the condescension, replaced by calculation and perhaps a hint of desperation. "A reasonable request," he said finally. "I propose we accept the human offer on a limited basis. A small human contingent will join my flagship as observers and advisors, bringing samples of their weapons technology." The speaker called for a vote, and despite significant opposition, the motion passed. As the council turned to other defensive measures, Krell approached the humans. "Be ready to depart within 6 hours," he told them tersely. "And I hope, for all our sakes, that your primitive solutions prove more effective than you claim." Walker smiled thinly. "We'll try not to say, 'I told you so' too loudly, Admiral." The Council flagship, Eternal Vigilance, shuddered as another blast struck its shields. Lieutenant Reed grabbed a bulkhead to steady herself, watching as alien crew members rushed to battle stations around her. Red emergency lights bathed the command deck in an ominous glow. "Shield strength at 30%, called out a technician, their voice tight with stress. Admiral Krell stood at the center of the command platform, his 4 arms operating different control interfaces simultaneously. "Divert auxiliary power to forward shields. Target the lead Kryvax vessel, and prepare to fire main batteries." Reed and her team of 5 human soldiers had been relegated to an observation area on the command deck, present but powerless. For 3 days, they had watched as the Kryvax systematically pushed back Council forces across 2 star systems. "Admiral," Reed said, stepping forward despite the glare from Krell's security detail, "our weapons remain a last resort, Lieutenant," Krell snapped without looking at her. "Our best ships and weapons are engaged here. We will handle this." The view screen showed the Kryvax battle group, 7 angular vessels with pulsing red energy signatures. The flagship's weapons fired, sending brilliant beams of energy toward the enemy. The beams struck the lead Kryvax ship, which briefly flickered but continued its advance. "Their shields are adapting to our frequencies," reported the weapons officer, a reptilian alien whose scales had paled with stress. Effectiveness dropping with each volley. Krell's upper eyes narrowed. "Switch to pattern Delta. All ships, concentrate fire on their lead vessel." Reed exchanged glances with Sergeant Peters, who subtly adjusted the rifle slung across his back. Their team had brought a variety of human weapons aboard, but they remained locked in secure containers under guard. For safety reasons, according to Krell. A massive impact rocked the ship, throwing several crew members from their stations. Consoles exploded in showers of sparks. "Direct hit to decks 7 through 9. Shouted a damage control officer. "Shield generators 3 and 4 are offline." Krell's composure finally cracked. "How are they penetrating our shields? The technology should be comparable." Reed moved closer to the Admiral's platform. "They've adapted to your weapons and defenses. You need to try something they haven't encountered." Before Krell could respond, the communications officer turned with panic in their eyes. "Admiral, we've lost contact with the rest of the fleet. We're being jammed." The view screen showed Council ships drifting, their weapons silent. The Kryvax vessels began to encircle the flagship. "Sir," the security chief called out, "we're detecting multiple breaches in the lower decks. Boarding parties." For the first time, real fear crossed Krell's face. "Seal all bulkheads. Deploy security teams tow." Another explosion cut him off as the deck beneath them trembled. The lights flickered and died, leaving only emergency illumination. "Admiral," Reed said firmly, "release my team and our weapons. Now." Krell stared at her, conflict evident in his four eyes. Pride warred with survival instinct. "The Kryvax will be here in minutes," Reed pressed. "Your energy weapons aren't stopping them. Let us try." After a long moment, Krell nodded sharply. "Release the human weapons. All of them." Reed didn't wait for further permission. She signaled her team, who rushed to retrieve their secured equipment. Within minutes, they had distributed their arsenal, rifles, shotguns, and specialized ammunition, and taken positions at key junctions near the command deck. Just in time. The bulkhead at the far end of the main corridor buckled inward with a screech of tearing metal. Through the gap stepped the first Kryvax boarder, a tall, armored figure with an insectoid face and glowing red eyes visible through its helmet visor. 5 more followed, each carrying what appeared to be energy weapons. Council security forces opened fire, their energy weapons striking the Kryvax boarders in flashes of light that seemed to simply slide off their armor. The aliens advanced steadily, raising their own weapons. "Hold your fire," Reed ordered her team through their comm units. "Wait until they're fully committed." The Kryvax cut down the first line of Council defenders with horrifying efficiency. Their weapons fired beams that didn't just burn. They seemed to disintegrate organic matter on contact. When half a dozen Kryvax had pushed into the corridor junction, Reed gave the order. Now, 6 human weapons fired simultaneously. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, a shocking contrast to the nearly silent energy weapons. The Kryvax, caught completely by surprise, staggered as bullets tore through their supposedly impenetrable armor. For the first time since the conflict began, the aliens showed confusion. One fell immediately, purple fluid spraying from multiple impact points. The others tried to return fire, but more bullets found gaps in their armor. Reed shouldered her rifle and took careful aim at the leader. "Not so untouchable after all," she murmured, and pulled the trigger. Purple fluid splattered across the corridor wall as Reed's shot found its mark. The Kryvax leader collapsed, its armored body making a heavy thud against the deck. The remaining boarders hesitated, a fatal mistake. The human team unleashed another volley, and 3 more invaders fell. The last 2 Kryvax tried to retreat, moving with surprising speed despite their bulky armor. Sergeant Peters stepped forward with a shotgun, the thunderous blast echoing through the corridor as one alien crumpled. The final invader managed to duck around a corner, firing blindly behind it. "Pursue and contain," Reed ordered, gesturing for Peters and Miller to follow the escaping Kryvax. "Jackson, guard this position. Roberts, with me." Council security forces stared in shock at the fallen Kryvax. Admiral Krell pushed through them, his 4 eyes fixed on the alien bodies and the obvious bullet holes that had penetrated their supposedly impervious armor. "How?" he demanded, looking at Reed. "Their armor resists our most advanced energy weapons." Reed knelt beside one of the fallen invaders, examining its armor closely. "Energy dispersion technology," she observed. "See these layers? They're designed to catch, absorb, and redirect energy attacks." She tapped the bullet hole. But they never prepared for something as simple as a piece of metal moving really fast. "Primitive," Krell muttered, but the word no longer carried contempt. The ship rocked again as another impact struck. The communications officer called out from the command deck. "Admiral, more boarding parties reported on decks 3, 5, and 11. Reed stood. "We need to get this information to the rest of your fleet. The Kryvax jamming is preventing coordination." "The communication systems are down," Krell replied grimly, "and the auxiliary transmitters were in the sections that took direct hits." Reed exchanged glances with Private Roberts. "We brought our own communication equipment. Short range, but if we can reach just one of your other ships." For a moment, Krell hesitated, old pride warring with new respect. Then he nodded. "What do you need?" "Access to an external airlock with a clear line of sight to the nearest Council vessel," Reed said, "and some of your people to help defend our position while we work." Krell barked orders, and soon they were moving through the damaged ship. Twice more, they encountered Kryvax boarding parties. Each time, the human weapons tore through the aliens' defenses, while Council energy weapons proved nearly useless. After the second skirmish, a Vorak security officer named Draz approached Reed. "I wish to use one of your weapons," he said, his pride clearly paining him. "For the survival of the ship." Reed handed him a pistol without hesitation. 8 rounds in the magazine. Press this to release it when empty. She demonstrated the loading procedure. They reached an observation deck with a small maintenance airlock. Through the viewports, they could see the battle continuing outside. Council ships drifting helplessly while Kryvax vessels methodically targeted them one by one. Roberts set up their communication equipment, a surprisingly compact array that Krell eyed with newfound respect. "It's directional and uses frequencies your people don't typically monitor," Reed explained. "A Kryvax won't be expecting it." "What message will you send?" Krell asked. "Simple battle tactics," Reed replied, checking her rifle as Roberts worked. "Target their shield generators with concentrated fire to create a momentary overload, then immediately follow with kinetic weapons. We've noticed their shields flicker for about 2 seconds after absorbing too much energy." The door to the observation deck buckled inward. More Kryvax were coming. "Almost ready," Roberts called out. Reed, Krell, and the mixed group of human and council defenders took positions. When the Kryvax burst through, they were met with a coordinated barrage. Energy weapons followed immediately by bullets, just as Reed had described. The results were devastating. Energy blasts overloaded the Kryvax shields for precious seconds, allowing the bullets to tear through unprotected armor. "Transmission ready," Roberts shouted over the gunfire. "Send it," Reed ordered, dropping another Kryvax with a well-placed shot. Roberts activated the transmitter, beaming tactical data and weapon specifications to the nearest council vessel. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, gradually, lights began to come back on aboard the drifting council ships. "They're receiving it," Krell said, watching through the viewport. His voice held something Reed had never heard from him before: hope. One council ship began to fire on a Kryvax vessel, using the new tactics. Energy weapons pulsed against the enemy shields, followed immediately by newly deployed kinetic weapon systems that the council ships carry for asteroid defense. The Kryvax ship's shields flickered and failed as projectiles tore through its hull. "It's working," Reed said, allowing herself a small smile. Admiral Krell turned to her, all 4 arms performing a formal gesture of respect. "Lieutenant Reed, it seems we have much to learn from primitive weapons after all." Through the viewport, they watched as more council ships adopted the new tactics. Slowly but surely, the tide of battle began to turn. 1 month after the battle, the Eternal Vigilance drifted majestically into Earth's orbit. From the observation deck, Lieutenant Reed watched her home planet come into view, the blue-white sphere growing larger as they approached. The sight brought an unexpected lump to her throat. "It looks so peaceful from up here," Admiral Krell remarked, joining her at the viewport. His 4 arms were clasped behind his back in what Reed had come to recognize as a posture of thoughtful respect. "It has its moments," Reed replied with a small smile. "Though I imagine it won't stay peaceful for long once your ships start landing." Below them, the first official council delegation to Earth was preparing to disembark. Not as conquerors or as patrons granting favors to primitives, but as equals seeking alliance against the Kryvax threat. "Your leaders are prepared for the technology exchange?" Krell asked. Reed nodded. "Earth has been preparing for this moment since we received your transmission last week. The red carpet is literally being rolled out as we speak." The door hissed open behind them, and Ambassador Walker entered. His uniform was pressed and formal, but his expression was one of barely contained excitement. "It's time, Admiral," he announced. "The council representatives are waiting in the shuttle bay." The 3 of them walked through corridors that bore the scars of battle. Repair work was still ongoing, but the ship had been deemed space-worthy enough for this historic mission. Council crew members they passed nodded respectfully to the humans, a far cry from the dismissive glances of just weeks ago. In the shuttle bay, representatives from 12 council species waited. Among them stood Tarn, the weapons specialist who had once mocked human firearms. Now he carried a modified human pistol at his hip, the first of many council officers to adopt the weapon. "Ambassador Walker," Tarn greeted, inclining his head. "Our weapons development team has completed the first prototypes based on your kinetic designs. Perhaps Lieutenant Reed would care to inspect them when we return." "I'd be honored," Reed replied. The journey to Earth's surface passed in a blur of diplomatic pleasantries. Reed found herself seated next to Drell, the blue-skinned scientist who had first shown interest in human weapons. "You knew all along, didn't you?" she asked quietly. "That our weapons might have applications your people hadn't considered." Drell's expression shifted into what Reed now recognized as a smile. "I suspected. The Council has been stable for so long that innovation stagnated. We advanced along predictable paths and assumed all intelligent species would do the same. And now we remember that different perspectives have value," Drell replied. "The Kryvax caught us unprepared because they developed in ways we hadn't anticipated. You showed us our blind spots." The shuttle touched down on the landing pad where Earth's leaders waited. As the delegation disembarked, Reed couldn't help but notice the changed dynamics. There was none of the condescension that had characterized first contact, only genuine respect, and from some, even admiration. Admiral Krell stepped forward to meet Earth's Secretary General, performing a formal bow that would have been unthinkable months ago. "On behalf of the Galactic Council," he announced in a voice loud enough for all to hear, "I extend our sincere apologies for our previous mischaracterization of human capabilities. Earth is hereby granted full Council membership, with all rights and responsibilities thereof." Applause broke out from the assembled officials. Walker moved to stand beside the Secretary General, his face composed, but his eyes revealing his triumph. "We accept with gratitude," the Secretary responded, "and we look forward to combining our strengths against our common enemy." Later, as the formal ceremonies concluded and the practical discussions of alliance began, Reed found herself standing with Admiral Krell on the balcony of the diplomatic center. In the distance, Council engineers were already helping to establish a defense grid based on combined technologies. "You know," Krell said thoughtfully, "there's an old saying among my people. Wisdom often comes from unexpected sources." Reed nodded. "We have a similar one. Don't judge a book by its cover." "I don't understand the reference," Krell admitted, "but I understand the sentiment." He turned to face her directly. "The Council has approved the formation of a new joint military task force to counter the Kryvax threat. I've recommended you to lead it, Lieutenant, or should I say, Commander Reed." Reed's eyes widened. "Me? But surely a Council officer with more experience would be bound by old thinking," Krell interrupted. "We need someone who sees possibilities where others see only primitiveness." He extended one of his hands. "What do you say, Commander?" Reed looked out at her planet, then at the stars beyond where the Kryvax still threatened. She took Krell's hand and shook it firmly. "I say the Kryvax are about to learn the same lesson you did, Admiral." She smiled. "Never underestimate the effectiveness of a well-placed bullet, or the species that fires it." Across the galaxy, the news spread quickly. Humans had joined the Council, bringing with them weapons that worked where energy beams failed. And though the Kryvax war was far from over, its outcome was no longer in doubt. The galaxy would never again laugh at human guns, not after hearing them fire.